Polaris has arrived finally with their complete release of the 2022 RZR lineup. Lots to talk about, lots of exciting new models. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the channel, everybody. It's Nick Olson, Chupacabra Offroad, and if you're new to the channel, I just want to give you guys a little bit of background on myself. I've been in this side-by-side UTV game for a little while, starting back in 2013. I purchased my first vehicle, which was a 2014 RZR XP4 1000, followed by a 2015 XP4 1000. In 2016, I was lucky enough to have a 2-seat and 4-seat RZR XP Turbo. 2017, I had a 20 XP4 Turbo. 2018, I had a 2018 XP4 Turbo. And most recently, I owned a 2019 RZR 4-seat Turbo S Dynamics, which I recently sold. I love that vehicle. We've got a ton of videos on the channel about it. And I sold that to buy what I drove last weekend, which is a 2021 CANAM X3 XRS. And I also currently own at the moment one more RZR, which is a 2019 RZR Turbo Best in Desert spec race car. And one more side note, speaking of cars, about a year ago I put down a deposit on a SPEEDUTV. So I feel like this is definitely my wheelhouse. I was a Polaris employee along some of those years, which is why I was able to own those vehicles year after year. So I've owned a lot of different RZRs, taken them on a lot of great rides, a lot of different environments. So let's try to break down these new vehicles and give you guys the gist of what I think. So the big news is Polaris launched two brand new models, a Pro R and a Turbo R. The Pro R has 4 different price points in a 2 and 4 seat. And then the Turbo R has 3 different price points, 2 and 4 seats. So to me, this feels like one of the biggest Polaris releases of all time. Traditionally in the past, you would see them launch a 2-seat new model, and then us 4-seat customers had to wait a few months for it to release. So, I mean, especially given the year with all the stuff that's been going on with COVID and supply chain, huge release from Polaris. So the night before the release, we reached out to our Instagram community and we said, hey, what are you guys hoping to see with this new release? Now, one guy said big suspension and power. I definitely say you got it. Another said for these new Polarises to not be $40,000. You kind of got it, but there's some stuff over 40 we'll get into. One guy commented to not have to spend 20K in upgrades to make these things safe, reliable, and comfortable. I feel you on that one. And the final guy that I thought was pretty funny is he said he hopes that they were gonna release a piece of crap so he wouldn't think twice about his SPEEDUTV deposit. So I'm in the same boat as you, so let's break it down and we'll kind of compare them. Okay, so starting off with the new top dog, the Pro R. The biggest news that they've been teasing since before the release is the addition of a brand new power plant that shoots way beyond the 1000 cc mark. It's a 4-cylinder, 2000 cc Pro Star motor. It makes 225 horsepower, and yes, it's still a CVT belt-driven transmission. 225, I think, is a nice increase if you think about it compared to the 181 Pro. It's a 44 horsepower increase over their most recent model. Some of you guys might say, well, my stock Can-Am makes 195, 200 horse. It's not that big of a difference. And you're right, but I also think, you know, until we all drive them, there's a different characteristic. I'm assuming this 4-cylinder is gonna have a lot more torque, which is really gonna work out well, I think, in the real world when you're off-roading between 5 and 50 miles an hour, exploding out of turns. Things have a very different characteristic. So in my opinion, the horsepower is just one part of the story, but once we do get to drive, everyone else gets to drive, we're gonna learn more about how that translates on the trail, in the dunes, and beyond. Speaking of specs, one spec I really love on the 2-seat model is the wheelbase. It is 104.5 inches. Now, the Pro XP before it is only 95 inches. The Can-Am I just bought and spent a weekend in GLAMIS last week is 102 inches. And guys, if you haven't driven one in the Southwest, in the desert, for a 2-seater, that 102-inch wheelbase is just pure magic. It's long enough to get you up on top of the big whoops. It's still fun and nimble. It's stable. Things don't happen overly quick. It's just a great, great wheelbase. So I'm really excited. I think in my last video I predicted we'd be around 100-inch. So 104.5, great. Now, the downside is this is a big girl, this is a big unit. The 4-seater is 133.5 inches now. I'm not that much of a fan of that. The Can-Am Max is 135. If you guys have watched the channel, you know that I very much dislike how long that car is. Yes, I have kids, but they're not huge. And you know, this is one of the reasons why I'm really excited about my SPEEDUTV. The El Jefe 4-seater is a 120-inch wheelbase, which is very similar to my race car and Turbo S Dynamics. I love that wheelbase. It makes me feel like I'm having my cake and eating it too. I get the seating of 4 people. It's fun. It's not overly long. I can take it on tight trails. I can take it rock crawling. It works well in a lot of environments, and I really feel like 100 to 120 is that magic space. So the Pro R is long. It's a big car. It's a heavier car. It's got more power, but it's a little longer than I would have liked. Now, what I love, probably more than anything, is the beefier frame, the beefy suspension, the beefy driveline components. Now, suspension, the A-arms and trailing arms are huge. The suspension travel has jumped up thanks to longer shocks with more shock strokes. So we're at 22.25 inches of front travel, 24.5 inches of rear travel. No, those are the real numbers, not the usable travel numbers that Polaris touts, which honestly, like, I really didn't like that statistic at first, but I think it is worth mentioning because when this vehicle does bottom out, you are getting all that travel because it's still not going to hit the frame on the ground. And honestly, this is something I experienced in my Can-Am in the dunes, where the Can-Am geometry doesn't allow you to use all the travel before you're hitting the frame. So it's just nice to see some increase, longer shocks, longer shock stroke, and much beefier A-arms and trailing arms. It's gonna lead to just a more compliant, better ride pretty much anywhere here in the Southwest. So like I said, I love all the beefiness. There's a lot of great videos that Polaris launched on their YouTube channel. We checked them all out. We'll link some of them in the description. They're worth looking at. But it's really great to see an OEM step up. I mean, you know, we really push these machines hard. The last thing I want when I'm 300 miles into my 500-mile Baja ride is to have some type of catastrophic failure that's gonna end my ride, that's gonna leave me high and dry. A lot of you guys have been there, you know what I'm talking about. We don't want to spend all the money to beef them up. We just want something from the showroom floor that we can push hard. And today's vehicles are amazingly resilient for you know, how they're built and what we can do with them. But it's great to see Polaris completely raise the bar. One thing that's interesting when you look at the front end of the vehicle on the front spindles, they didn't use a true double shear setup like the Speed. They're still using ball joints. They're much bigger. It looks significantly more improved than what they had in the past, so it will probably hold up and be okay. I'd prefer if they did a double shear like the Speed. And one other interesting point, achieving all that suspension travel while beefing up the driveline components, is the addition of a rear differential, which is separated from the transmission. Now, normally the rear axles will go into the transmission. Now you've got about an 8-inch driveline from the trans to the rear diff, and this allows the suspension geometry to stay intact, get those bigger suspension travel numbers because the axles themselves can be longer and you're reducing the CV angle. And on top of that, they've also made the rear geometry better with the addition of a rear toe link. It also runs inside or parallel to the trailing arm, and this is an improvement on Polaris's behalf to keep the geometry better as it's cycling through the travel and reduce that side-to-side feeling that some of you guys may feel when you're jamming through the whoops, which is kind of an inherent issue or flaw of the old traditional 2-radius rod setup. So kudos to Polaris for, even though they're adding more complexity, they're trying to solve a problem, increase the performance and the handling, because I'm sure when everyone buys these things, they're gonna wanna hammer some big whoops, and it's important that this thing tracks straight and true when you're going fast. Now, there's another great technical video that Polaris brought up about the breakdown of their Dynamics live valve suspension. Now, I am a big fan of this. I had it on my 2019. I love being able to switch between the modes. My 2019 had 3 modes. Now with this new version, there's 4 modes. And what's also been improved is not only is it adjusting the compression on the fly, it's adjusting the rebound as well, in addition to adjusting the feel and the dampening of the steering wheel. So you've got compression, rebound, 4 settings instead of 3, with the steering, changing the different feels. It's a nice upgrade. And on top of that, if you check out their rock climbing or their rock crawling feature, it elevates the ground clearance of the vehicle, and it tries to keep the vehicle as flat as possible if you're on a rock situation, which is very cool. So, I mean, all the modes sound really well thought out. This is a level of technology that, you know, Can-Am isn't going to be able to compete with anytime soon, Speed, anybody for that matter. It's cool to see it evolve. I love the older generation. I can only imagine this version is even more enjoyable to drive anywhere you go. And if you're like us, we take these things everywhere. Dunes, rock crawling, Baja. So having something that works well in all these scenarios is awesome. The only thing I don't really like about the live valve dynamics is there isn't a whole lot of adjustability. I've had my suspension resprung and revalved, and you can play with some crossover rings, but beyond that, You just have to run it. My new Can-Am, I've got the RR model, which has a lot of adjustability. I have high speed compression, low speed compression, adjustable rebound, in addition to having the crossover ring. So it's fun to geek out with that. As you guys can probably tell, I'm a suspension geek. So it's nice to see more options, more adjustability from the live valve. And I think as a whole, it'll work well for a lot of people. If you're like me, if you like to take it into a lot of different environments, you know, you're gonna be less tinkering available, but I think as a whole, it does have the crossover ring, so you have that adjustment from the factory. One other stat that I really like to see was the bigger charging system. The stator alternator is up to 1700 watts. Now, this is much more improved than my 900 watt stator out of my 2019. So great to see. You guys know how it is when you start to stack up these accessories. A lot of lights draw a lot of amperage. Now it looks like you're not gonna have to worry about it. Put whatever you want on your vehicle, you're gonna be good. All right, lots of great things, right? But how much does it cost? Entry-level pricing on the 2C Pro R is $31,999 now. This is with the Walker Evans, non-Fox, non-Dynamics, non-Ride Command equipped vehicle. But it's a good price, I think, for a base for how beefy and how beefed up the suspension, drivetrain, motor, etc. is. And that goes all the way up to $40,999 for the Ultimate Launch Edition, limited edition model now. So 4C pricing, entry level bumps up to $35,999. And again, for the Launch limited edition, we're at $44,999. So that's right, rewind it, play it back. There is now a production UTV you can buy that's $45,000 before fees. So let that sink in for a minute. It's a pretty wild price point that we're entering. So in my opinion, I think $32,000 is pretty reasonable for a 4-cylinder, for all this new technology, for a much beefier one-piece frame. You are not getting the live valve suspension to spring for that as an additional $6,000 upgrade, but you get a few more features like the Rockford 5-gate stereo, the Ride Command in-dash, which is a nice feature to have. So at least Polaris is giving you some options. You at least have some nice entry-level price points with the meat and potatoes. And then if you want to step up and get more of the nice bells and whistles, you've got those options too. So the term that always gets thrown around in our industry, game changer. Is it a game changer? What's a game changer? Polaris launched a game changer. We've gone up to 2,000 cc's, and you guys know the old adage, there's no replacement for displacement. One of the engineers, Pat McCardle, was saying this thing's doing 90 miles per hour off the showroom floor. You've got a much beefier setup. Time will tell if the CVT does hold up. It's a bigger, heavier car. Some of you guys that ride in tighter areas, the East Coast, it might not be as advantageous for you, but it's pretty clear to me Polaris designed this car for those of us in the Southwest that like riding in big, nasty terrain, big whoops, dunes, Baja, etc. That's really who this car was geared towards. All right, so the second big release, not to be overlooked, is the new Turbo R. Now, this is a replacement for the beloved Turbo S. A lot of you RZR owners probably agree with me, the Turbo S was the best RZR ever made, but this keeps the same dimensions and wheelbase of the Pro XP, which is a 95-inch wheelbase on the 2-seater, 125 on the 4-seater. The width expands to 74 inches wide, more suspension travel. The horsepower does remain the same at 181 horse, so no real changes on the motor or the turbo, but the transmission has been beefed up, higher quality bearings, and that's a good sign because that Pro XP Trans is really good. I've got one in my race car and it holds up well to extreme racing conditions in terms of belt life and belt temperatures for most people once it's tuned properly. So I think this is a really exciting model. Yes, it's not the new top dog, but as a replacement that fits with a lower price point, more affordable for a lot of you, replaces the beloved Turbo S. The front end of this car is completely identical to the Pro R. So the A-arms are beefy, the brakes are beefed up, triple piston calipers, the knuckles, all those types of elements. The rear suspension also beefed up with the new geometry adjustments. It's just shorter. It retains that wheelbase I really like, which is 125 on the 4-seater. So, you know, if I can't get over the long wheelbase, or if you're like me on the Pro R, 181 is still a great amount of horsepower. You can tune it, and that's what I like about it. I mean, even if you tune around 200 horsepower range, you have a much beefier frame and a roll cage and suspension that a little bit less horsepower is going to make this vehicle even more reliable because it doesn't have the horsepower to really break everything as much as maybe some of the old models would have. So nice work, Polaris. So the new Turbo R pricing on the 2-seater is $25,999. So just for some perspective, this is $2,500 more than the 2021 Turbo S Velocity Edition, which I would compare it to. Similar shock setup. So, and if you want to upgrade to the Ultimate Edition with the Dynamics Fox Live Valve suspension, it's $32,999. The 4-seat pricing on the Turbo R starts at $29,999, with the Ultimate being $7,000 more at $36,999. Okay, so we're reaching new price points we've never seen in the industry, so let me know in the comments. Does the new increase in performance justify the price? You know, this is going to be somewhat hard of a question to answer until we see how well everything holds up. Are there going to be any issues? It's going to be a first-year model, so there's always those challenges and concerns. Is the 225 horsepower 4-cylinder going to eat belts, or do they have it solved? Things like that will just take time for the consumers to drive and abuse before we really find the answer. But kudos to Polaris. You know, we knew they were the big P. The sleeping giant has been awakened. I think they've really raised the bar for the industry. It's exciting times. And I think that, you know, for what they're providing, you've got all these different levels and price points. You do have something that's more affordable. And when you think about how much a lot of us or you have spent to upgrade your vehicle to make it safer, reliable, especially the Can-Am, it's definitely the Achilles heel of having to double shear the front end, things of that nature, upgrade radius rods, things that we've all spent a lot of time and money doing, that you hope that almost everything on this vehicle is pretty dialed. It does come with 32-inch tires. Everything that I mentioned before, higher quality seats than Polaris has ever used in the past. So it's good to see them at least baking in a lot more of these features, and it might get to a point now where a lot of us aren't going to have the money to spend all the upgrades. The cage even has a different fitting that they created. It's stiffer, so cage builders are gonna have a little bit harder time making aftermarket cages, but I think you're gonna see a lot of these things running around pretty stock, because for that level of money, people are expecting it to be great right out of the box. I mean, yeah, you're still gonna have to spend your money on your Chupacabra mirrors and door bags and storage boxes, things of that nature, but we're definitely expecting more for our money at that price point. I think Polaris has done a good job in the middle of all these price raises during the pandemic. So final thought, I'm gonna pose this as a question to you guys. 2000 cc's, is this still even classified as a side-by-side or a UTV? Is it gonna be street legal? Do you have to wear a helmet in California? Very complex questions. I don't know the answer. Let's talk about it below. We'll learn more once we get to go drive it, talk to some more of the people in the know, and this information will definitely come out over time. But if you guys like the content, please like and subscribe. We're gonna drive this thing here pretty soon. We'll give you our feedback. And as always, we've got a whole lot more coming your way.